Good morning, church. Today's reading is from Colossians chapter 1, verse 15 to 18. Verse 15. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He's the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. This is the word of the Lord.
So I'll just invite Stu up. Just letting you know that Stu found out very last minute that he's up today. Unfortunately, Corey's not well. Eliza might be able to give us an update later on how he's going, but thank you, Stu.
Yeah, that's right, but it is an enormous privilege to be able to share with you today, and on such a special day, Mother's Day, and to share from a text that is one of my favourite passages in the scripture. So it wasn't hard to say yes when I heard last night. We landed back from Brisbane visiting our daughter. I was up for a Wesley function on Friday, so it was great to be able to come back, and here we'd have the opportunity to be with you this morning. This just a little while ago in the opening song bracket, we actually sang a song. The words go back to the 2nd century. It's the Apostles' Creed. It's in a modern form, but those words are some of the first words that were put together outside the scriptures themselves, where the early believers described the faith that they have. This is what we believe. This is who God is. This is who Jesus is. This is what Christian faith means. And what we're going to do now, the text that was just read to us by Ray, is actually, whether you recognise or not, it's one of the first hymns ever sung in the church. It's actually the record of a song lyric. People would gather in churches and sing the words the Apostle Paul writes to the church in Colossae. It's in Colossians chapter 1, that scripture we heard read to us before. Now let me tell you about the church in Colossae. Colossae is about 70 miles inland from Ephesus in a place called Turkey today, in Europe and Asia, just around the border of Europe and Asia. And Colossae was a poor town. It was only a small town. And Paul is writing to them around the year 62 AD, at 62 AD, and he's never actually visited this church, but he's been absolutely critical to how they started. See, what happened about 10 years earlier, in 52 AD, Paul was in Ephesus, a big, bustling port city, where everyone would come for business and travel and all those sorts of things. And while he was there for 2 years, revival breaks out. God does amazing things, and hundreds, thousands of people come to faith in Jesus. And one of those people who come to faith in Jesus is a man called Epaphras. And Epaphras comes from Colossae. He comes to Ephesus on business. He hears Paul preach the gospel. He comes to faith in Jesus. He goes back to Colossae, his hometown, and he tells other people about Jesus. And they come to believe in Jesus, and so they form a church. That's how it happens. Disciples make disciples who make disciples. And so the church is birthed in Colossae. Paul's never visited them, but they meet in a house of a man called Philemon. It's another book, another letter we have in the scriptures. So Philemon, Epaphras, Paul. And then 10 years later, after the church in Colossae is given birth to, Paul writes them because he's heard some troubling news. He's heard that some people who've come to Colossae, and they're telling people that Jesus is a great start, but they need more if they want to really know God. These people, they're called the Gnostics. They're coming in and they're saying, Jesus is a great place to start if you want to love God, but you need to have, when you pray, you need some secret passwords. I don't know about you, but I can't remember the passwords I have now. But you need some secret passwords. You need to understand some particular things about astrology, about how the heavenly bodies move. You need to practice certain spiritual disciplines. You need to fast at certain times. If you do all of these things, then Jesus is like the first rung before you climb, as you climb up to God. And then these secret passwords are another rung, and then these astrological practices are another rung, and then these spiritual disciplines, they're another rung, and you're going to get closer to God. And Paul hears about this, And he's troubled. And essentially, the 95 verses of Colossians, it only takes 15 minutes to read. And we're going to be in Colossians for a few weeks now. And I reckon one of the best things you can do as a spiritual discipline over the next few weeks is read Colossians every day. And I promise you, if you read Colossians every day, it'll change you. But what Paul is saying to them, this is the essential message of Colossians. Jesus plus nothing equals everything. Jesus plus nothing equals everything. And so after he writes his introductory comments, he comes then to this wonderful hymn. We're going to step through it verse by verse and look at what he says. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful letter that he writes. And Paul is writing from prison in Rome to people, remember, he's never actually met them. And what he's saying to them essentially is this. We don't need a ladder to climb to God, to reach out to God, because we have a God who reaches to us via a cross. We don't need a ladder to climb to God. God is reaching to us with his love via a cross. So let's look at this scripture verse by verse. Right, I need to turn this on, and here we go. Look at that, it works. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Now, in the ancient world, the Jewish people had this radical understanding. There wasn't a multitude of gods. There was only one God. And despite all the idolatry around them, where people had physical representations of who God was, the Jewish people, they did not have that. They passionately believed that no one had ever fully seen God, that God was invisible to them physically. And then Jesus comes along and he makes this radical claim. To see Jesus was to see God. That Jesus is the visible image of the otherwise invisible God. And the word that Paul uses here, that he's the image of the invisible God, is actually the Greek word icon, which literally means the exact and full representation. Do we have any football, what I mean by football, but I mean soccer fans here? Any Manchester United fans, Liverpool? Any Manchester United fans? Who's the best player for Manchester United right now? Ronaldo. Of course, it's Ronaldo. One of the best footballers of this generation, perhaps the best footballer of this generation. Now, I'll come to this in a moment. When Ronaldo, just a few years ago, Ronaldo was celebrated in his hometown in Portugal. An airport was named after him, and they commissioned a statue. And when the statue was unveiled, this is what the statue looked like. Here's Ronaldo on one side, and here's the statue on the other side. Now, does that look like an exact and full representation? Who would want their money back? I think I would. Now, some people on the internet, as only on the internet they can do, some people on the internet said, well, now if Ronaldo looked like his statue, this is what Ronaldo would look like. That is not an exact and full representation. Now, what Paul is saying is this. Jesus is perfect, the perfect and only complete portrait and representation of God. That Jesus reveals all of God's power, all of God's beauty, all of God's glory in its perfect character and essence. What Paul is saying is this. This is amazing. This is the heart of the Christian faith. To see Jesus is to see God. To see Jesus is to see God. Now, Paul says he is the firstborn over all creation. Does this mean that God created Jesus before he created everyone else and everything else? Now, that's what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe. But that's not what we believe. That's not the essence of Christian faith. Jesus was not created. He was and is the creator and sustainer of all things. When Paul uses the language firstborn, it means he is the supreme one over and above all creation. Do we have any firstborn children here? We all know that we're the most important ones, don't we? Oh, sorry, I've just lost most of the congregation right there. But in the ancient culture, the firstborn was the one that was supreme over all other siblings. So what Paul is saying here is that Jesus is not the highest point of creation, but he's sovereign over it. That Jesus is creation's means, its goal, and sustainer. This is all that we see and unseen. Now, a number of years ago, the Kepler telescope, which has been orbiting our Earth for decades now, and it's been scanning 145,000 stars across the universe, looking for orbiting planets. And just a few years ago, there was this wonderful announcement where they discovered 219 new planets. And the really exciting thing about this for scientists was that 10 of these planets were discovered in what they call the Goldilocks zone. What's the Goldilocks zone? It's that place where life, as we know it, is possible. Where there's just the right conditions for life, for the potential of life to exist. And here's the amazing thing about the planet on which you and I live, where we reside. That Earth is one of 700 quintillion planets. 1 in 700 quintillion. That's 7 with 20 zeros after it. That's a lot of planets, isn't it? And this planet is finely tuned for life. We live in this finely tuned universe, finely tuned for life. So, for example, just the nature of gravity. Scientists tell us that if gravity was 1/trillionth of 1%, had less force than by 1/trillionth of 1%, then everything in the universe would sort of fling apart. That matter, as we understand it, would not be able to exist in its current constructs. If it was 1/trillionth of 1% heavier gravity, there would not so much be a big bang, but a big crunch. Everything would implode in and of itself. This is the finely tuned universe in which we live. Fred Hoyle, who was an atheist astronomer from Cambridge University, said the possibility of human beings existing is the same possibility of a tornado running through a junkyard and miraculously forming a 747 jet. We are, my friends, a miracle in the middle of a miraculous universe, aren't we? Aren't we? All of it, Paul is saying, all of this miracle that is our universe came from Jesus, was through Jesus, and is for Jesus. So let's go on to the next part of the scripture. It says this: For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. This text is all about Jesus, him and he. It's all referring to Jesus. Jesus is the agent of creation, ex nihilo, out of nothing, all that is seen and unseen. And what scientists tell us is that galaxies are pregnant with invisible, exotic material. That our universe is made up 68% of dark energy, 27% that's dark matter. You know, of our universe, only 5% of our universe is visible to us. And the truth is that Jesus breathed it all into existence by his word. Let there be. Let there be. All things were created by him and toward him. Everything began with Jesus and will end with Jesus. All things spring forth at his command. All things will return to him at his command. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He's the sustainer of the universe. Without Christ, the universe disintegrates. A wonderful theologian put it this way: Christ keeps the cosmos from becoming a chaos. I love science. Science, it does incredible things. It observes and describes and analyzes our universe and gets behind it all, the beauty and the wonder of it all. But what science can't do, it has limitations. It can't explain the big questions. Why? Where? Who? C.S. Lewis put it this way. He used the analogy of a snooker table or a billiard table. You know, the laws of physics can explain how it is that when one billiard ball hits another billiard ball, that the force and effect of that motion on that billiard ball and what it does on the table. But what science can't do is explain who holds the cue? Who brings that movement into existence in the first place? What Paul is saying in this beautiful text is that Jesus is the rhyme, the reason, and the rationale of the universe. He's the center, the origin, and the destiny of the universe. He goes on to say this, and he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. What I mean to say is this: Jesus has first place everywhere. Now, here at WIC Ryde, Pastor Corey is the leader. But he's not really the leader, can I tell you? At Wesley Mission, I'm the superintendent, minister, and CEO. That's a pretty impressive title, I reckon. But can I tell you, I'm not the leader. Can I tell you that the only leader that WIC Ryde, that Wesley Mission has, the supreme leader, is Jesus. He is the Lord of all. He is Lord. He is the supreme leader. He is the head of the church. And it goes on to say that he is the firstborn from among the dead, that he is the forerunner for all who are raised to eternal life. My friends, just a few weeks ago we celebrated Easter, but we are Easter people who do not just look back at the resurrection and celebrate a past event. We look forward with anticipation to the day when we will be raised like him. Hallelujah. That is who we are. We have this resurrection hope that carries us forward. He goes on to say this. This is all part of the one song. Can you imagine singing this? It doesn't really rhyme, does it? For God was pleased to have all of his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. There's two radical claims in this part of the passage. Claim number one, that Jesus in his humanity contained all the fullness of God. There is nothing God is that was not in Jesus. The essence of God was fully exhausted in the Son. Jesus is not God light, L-I-T-E. All the fullness of God is in him. The Creator clothed himself in the form of creation. That's claim number one, that Jesus in his humanity contained all the fullness of God. And then claim number two, equally radical, is that the Creator embraced his creation and subjected himself to its lowest point, a shameful death on a cross. The radical truth we celebrate at Easter, on Good Friday and Easter Sunday, is the one who is the source and sustainer of life subjected himself to death willingly. The cosmic Christ became the one who was nailed to a cursed tree. Why? To reconcile all things back to himself. Let's go on. We're still in the same hymn, same song. It goes on to say this. We're almost done. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior, but now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. Paul's picture is blunt, straightforward. He points out the ugliness of human behavior, of sin that is seen and unseen, the things that we do and we don't do. And he talks about our alienation from God. And he talks about it as a persistent and permanent condition. And he talks about the hunger and the thirst that we have for something, someone beyond our reach. And for most human beings, there's this sense, can I ever climb enough rungs to reach God? Can I ever reach the God that my heart longs for? It's a wonderful story told of the great Second World leader. It's a true story of Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill led England through the Second World War. Remarkable leader, remarkable man. And towards the end of the Second World War, when the Allied forces were preparing to invade Europe, to take back Europe from the Nazis, he said to his general, who was over all the forces, General Eisenhower, he said, "Dwight, I want to be there when the troops land on the beaches. I want to be on a ship just off the coast of Normandy. I want to be able to see things unfold." And Eisenhower was gobsmacked. He was horrified at this thought, because he knew that those ships would be within artillery reach of the German defences, and that the Prime Minister, the leader of the Allied forces, supreme leader, would be under threat of being killed. And so he said, "Winston, you can't do that. You can't come. You're putting yourself at risk. It's too much of a risk." And Winston said in his stubbornness, "No, I'm going to be there. If my boys are going to be there, I need to be there." And so Eisenhower went to one authority that sat above Winston Churchill. He went to King George. And he said, "Your Majesty, this is what your Prime Minister is wanting to do. Can you please do something? Can you please convince him to do otherwise?" And King George went to Winston Churchill and said, "Winston, you can't go, but if you must go, then I will go with you." And Winston Churchill said to King George, but Your Majesty, you can't come. We can't risk the king. We can't risk you." We said, "If you go, Winston, I go." And eventually Winston Churchill got the message. This is a true story. You can read it in history. And he decided that he could not go because he knew that kingdoms do everything they can to protect the king. Isn't that true? Kingdoms do everything they can to protect the king. It's the object of the game of chess. You do everything you can to protect the king. Except for one kingdom. The kingdom of Jesus Christ. How is this kingdom established? Not through protecting the king, but through his willing sacrifice. When he laid down his life on a cross. Kingdoms do anything to protect their king. When kings fall, kingdoms have lost. But Jesus did exactly the opposite. He surrendered his life, as Paul says, as a ransom from many. And his atoning sacrifice makes peace with God, reconciles us to God. And his crown of thorns, which was meant to be a crown that mocked his kingly claims, was actually a crown that declared his righteous reign. We do not reach for God, my friends. Remember this if you remember nothing else from today. We do not reach for God, but God reaches for us. There's no ladder reaching higher, but a God reaching lower. On the ABC, they often will platform well-known atheists like Richard Dawkins and others on shows like Q&A and these sorts of things. And one of the atheists they have platformed in recent years is a scientist from America called Lawrence Krauss. And he says this about human beings. See what you think. Human beings are just a bit of pollution. If you got rid of us and all the stars and all the galaxies and all the planets and all the aliens and everybody, then the universe will be largely the same. We're completely irrelevant. That's cheery, isn't it? And I think he's completely, utterly wrong. Because what the scriptures tell us and what we know inherently is that we are completely, utterly, totally, radically, sacrificially loved. This is the gospel. We are loved by the one who created us and who in turn died for us. We don't climb rungs on a ladder reaching for God, but rather God on a cross reaches for us. Paul, he recites this song. He says, this is the hymn we're singing in churches across Europe and Palestine. This was the Hillsong song of the first century. And then he says this at the end. And this is the song we've been singing, and he goes on to summarize, and he says this. This is the gospel that you have heard and that has been proclaimed to every creature under heaven, of which I, Paul, have become a servant. What Paul is saying to the church in Colossae, who are confused because they think they don't have it all, they don't have enough. He's saying, don't add or subtract from this gospel. You cannot add to what God has done. You can only respond with faith. Rolling forward 2,000 years, Michael Horton puts it this way. The gospel is not good instructions, not a good idea, and not good advice. The gospel is an announcement of what God has done for us in Jesus Christ. And so, my friends, our choice is to live in response to this gospel or to fight it. Sue and I lived on the Gold Coast for 15 years before moving to Sydney. We moved up from South Australia. If you know anything about Adelaide, you will know that it's on a gulf, on the Spencer Gulf. And so basically the beaches are like a lake. There's not many waves. Only when the wind comes do you get waves. When we moved to the Gold Coast, we discovered waves, surf. Our son discovered bodyboarding. And we discovered ocean rips and swimming between the flags and these sorts of things. In Adelaide, you don't have to swim between the flags, really. But in the Gold Coast, you do, because ocean rips are really dangerous. And one of the things when you come to the Gold Coast and when you get some basic education about ocean rips, or when you fly into Australia and they show you the videos about how to be safe in the water, what they tell you, amongst other things, is if you get caught in an ocean rip, what do? Do you fight the rip? Or do you let the rip carry you until it runs out of force? So basically the essential instruction is if you get caught in a rip, don't fight it, let it carry you to where it's going to carry you, then swim parallel to the beach and come back in. Or put your hand up and wait for a rescue. When it comes to the gospel, when it comes to the good news of Jesus Christ, freedom isn't found in fighting God's love, but in surrendering to it, my friends. Freedom isn't found in fighting God's love, but in surrendering to it. And now the greatest force in the universe isn't an ocean rip or a split atom. It's the nail-pierced hands of Jesus, the power of love drawing us to himself. Same hands that drip with blood that were the ones that flung stars into space. A number of years ago, as I finish, in Rwanda, in Africa, of course, where they suffered through a terrible genocide, as the UN moved in afterwards, they established a number of health programs, including a vaccination program for young children. And they had this wonderful education program for mothers to encourage them to have their children vaccinated. They had posters and they had pamphlets and all these sorts of things. And then they were really disappointed when it seemed like the message wasn't getting through. What they had underestimated was the fact that so many of the mothers, because of the war and because of the genocide that had been experienced, were illiterate. They couldn't read the promotional material that had been put out. And so they came up with another strategy. They came to understand through talking with local leaders that how women communicated essential facts with other women was through songs. They would make up songs and they would sing them to one another, communicating the information they needed. And so what they did, the UN leaders, they came up with songs that communicated the importance of vaccination. And they got women to sing them to other women, who sang them to other women, who sang them to other women. And they saw the vaccination rate go up and up and up and up. And what they discovered, the United Nations, was if they had no song, they had no message. If they had no song, they had no message. What Bible historians tell us, theologians tell us, is the passage that we have been stepping our way through this morning is a remnant of an ancient hymn. And what Paul is saying to the church in Colossae, what he's saying to us today is this: some truth cannot be left as dry words in our mouth, but have to be a song of the heart. My friends, my question to you this morning, is the gospel a song that captures your heart? Is it a song that captivates your spirit? See, the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, is a song sung by God that finds its way to our lips from our heart, that Jesus, our Jesus, is the creator and redeemer of humanity, that Jesus is God in human flesh. All the fullness of God dwells in him. that Jesus is the one who is crucified and risen, is God's song sung over us and all creation. Jesus is the melody that holds the universe in place. This, my friends, is the gospel. This is the gospel. Will you pray with me? I'll invite the team to come up. So Jesus, this morning, I want to thank you that every time we gather in this place, we celebrate the gospel. We celebrate the good news that you have sung, are singing, and will always sing over us, that we are loved by you, that we are your children, that Jesus, you are the full and complete representation of God. All the fullness of God dwells in you, and that through your sacrificial death, through your victorious resurrection, you have reconciled us, we who are alienated from God, to yourself. And so, Father, I pray this morning that every person in this room would know how deeply, profoundly, and perfectly they are loved. God, that you would draw them to yourself. And Lord, those of us who know you here this morning, who know what it is to be captivated by your love, but for whom the song in our heart has grown dim, God, I pray this morning that you might awaken new joy, a joy that comes in your Spirit. For those of us who do not yet know you, have not surrendered to the power of your love, God, I pray this morning that rather than strive to climb a ladder, we would instead reach out our hand to the one who's reaching for us. Come, Holy Spirit, I pray. Move amongst your people, and as we sing a simple song of gratitude, of praise, of thanks, I pray, God, that you would stir in our spirit a new appreciation for who you are and what you've done. I pray all of this in Jesus' name. Together we say, amen. Would you like to stand to sing together?